distinguished guests, good morning and a very warm welcome to this morning's launch event. I'm Seah, your MC for today. In this seminar, we will be sharing and discussing key findings from our new report, Southeast Asia Climate Outlook Survey 2020 to 2024, Understanding Regional Attitudes Towards Climate Change, a synthesis report covering 5 years of data collected through our annual Southeast Asia Climate Outlook Survey. This report is a joint initiative with the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities at the Singapore University of Technology and Design. The Climate Change in Southeast Asia program would like to take this opportunity to express our sincere thanks to the Tara Climate Foundation for their support of this report. Their contribution has been invaluable in making this work possible. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Janil Puthucheary, Senior Minister of State for Sustainability and the Environment, Singapore, for a fireside session moderated by Mr. Choi Kwok, Director and Chief Executive Officer of ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute. We are also pleased to have Professor Chong Hean, Chair of the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities, to deliver the opening remarks. Finally, our esteemed panel of expert discussants will be sharing their reactions and insights on the findings on our new report. Before we begin, please allow me to draw your attention to a few housekeeping matters. We will be having a Q&A session during the fireside session with SMS Dr. Janil Puthucheary, as well as during the panel discussion. For the online audience, please submit your questions via the Zoom Q&A function, stating your name and affiliation. If you encounter any technical issues, please use the chat function to reach out to our technical support team. For our in-person audience, please raise your hand and wait for the moderator to prompt you before using the nearest microphone in the middle of the room to pose your question together with your name and affiliation. Thank you for your cooperation. Without further ado, I now have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Choi Kwok, Director and Chief Executive Officer of ISEAS, to deliver his welcome remarks. Mr. Choi, please.
Dr. Janil Puthucheary, Senior Minister of State for the Ministry of Sustainability and the Environment, Singapore. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to everyone. Let me also take this opportunity to welcome you to the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute's annual climate flagship event. Of course, we are very honored to have Dr. Janil here with us for this fireside chat this morning. I want to express appreciation to SMS for taking time out from his busy schedule to speak at this event. And I also want to thank all the distinguished panelists for making time to discuss the key survey findings later on. We are here today to launch a report entitled Southeast Asia Climate Outlook Survey 2020 to 2024, Understanding Regional Attitudes Towards Climate Change. This report is based on 5 years of data from the Southeast Asian Climate Outlook Survey, which is a 10-country public perception survey we conducted annually from 2020 to 2024, which is last year. And the aim was to understand the perceptions of Southeast Asian public towards regional and national climate change issues. Through this survey, we have gained insights on how everyday Southeast Asians view the severity of climate impacts, such as extreme weather events and food insecurity, the opportunities and challenges of the impending energy transition, the different roles played by the government, the private sector, and the civil society, and also the prospects of climate cooperation with extra-regional countries. Since the inauguration of the survey in 2020, our data have often raised the same questions. How do perceptions compare against realities? How do we explain variations in Southeast Asian opinions across factors like nationality and age? Have opinions changed over time as rapid geopolitical and economic developments such as the outbreak of conflict, inflationary pressures, energy crisis, and the US-China competition rattle our region? That is why this year we have decided to dive deeper into the data that we have collected, focusing on selected survey questions across multiple years to draw out key findings that go beyond just the yearly descriptive trends. To this end, we are really grateful, and it has already been mentioned, for our partnership with the Lee Kuan Yew's Center for Innovative Cities at the Singapore University of Technology and Design, whose expertise in the complex dynamics between human societies and environmental change was invaluable for the analysis that we will discuss today. This report comes at a crucial moment in global climate action. We are now just 5 years from 2030, a major milestone for the Paris Agreement. According to the IPCC, in order to achieve the Paris target of maintaining temperature increases below 1.5 degrees, global emissions must reduce by about 43% by 2030 compared to 2019 levels. This year also marks the deadline for the third round of the nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, to be submitted by parties to the Paris Agreement. NDCs are a crucial signifier of countries' voluntary climate commitments and are expected to demonstrate enhanced ambition at each successive round of submissions. As of the time of completion of this report, 6 of the 11 ASEAN countries have submitted their new NDCs, and that's Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. Notably, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand have now adopted absolute emission targets, which is a key step forward in ensuring the transparency and accountability of commitments when compared with earlier relative targets based on GDP or business as usual scenarios. For the first time, the 3 countries have also introduced targets to peak their emissions by 2030 or before 2030, as is the case for Thailand. Despite these promising regional developments, the global outlook for the Paris Agreement still looks bleak. At the Bali Climate Summit on 6 November, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that we are headed for quite a big overshoot of the 1.5 degree target. Even if all the latest NDC targets are fully achieved, the world will still be on track for 2.3% degrees of warming. As he noted, every fraction of a degree means more hunger, displacement, and loss, especially for those least responsible. Closer to home, we have watched Typhoon Kaumagi and Super Typhoon Fongwang displace millions of people in the Philippines. Our report thus provides a timely reflection of the progress this region and its partners are making towards climate awareness and ambition, as well as the implementation of adaptation and mitigation policies. With the use of both quantitative and qualitative analysis, this report places our survey results in the context of national and regional climate policy developments, media influence, domestic political issues, urban-rural environments, and the relationships between ASEAN and its dialogue partners. The report is divided into 6 sections, each focusing on a key finding from a different part of the regional climate discourse. We look first at how media shapes public perceptions of climate issues. Then we looked at the gap between what people believe and the actual progress of our regional energy transition. We then explored how individual climate actions align or don't align with broader public efforts. Next, we examine the socio-economic factors that influence climate policy acceptance across societies. The 5th section looks at the growing rural-urban divide, especially in the context of food security. And finally, the report then discusses how countries in our region and ASEAN as a whole should rethink our climate partnerships going forward. As we take in the latest developments from COP30, we also look ahead to the next stage of our race towards the global net zero target. We hope these findings will spark more conversations at both individual and community levels. They also help us to identify the biggest challenges that we need to tackle, whether they be in climate communication, implementation of low-carbon transition policies, or advancing international climate cooperation. Moving forward, we intend to do another run of the Southeast Asia Climate Outlook Survey in 2026. It will be published every 2 years thereafter, providing a regular pulse on how the region's climate views and priorities continue to evolve. Of course, this is pending that we have enough funding. Yeah. We are also looking forward to including ASEAN's newest member state, which is Timor-Leste, in our next report. I would like to thank the Tara Climate Foundation for their kind support and collaboration. We actually sincerely appreciate the partnership with them and look forward to continuing our work together with them. In closing, I'd like to thank every one of you who are joining us here in person and also those who are online. I believe that we will all draw new insights from our fireside chat with SMS Janil and also the panel discussion that follows after. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Choi. I would now like to invite Professor Chong Koon Hean, Chair of the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities, to the podium to deliver her opening remarks. Prof. Cheong, please.
Well, good morning, everyone. SMS, Dr. Janil, Puthucheary, distinguished guests, colleagues and friends. And on behalf of the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities, also at the Singapore University of Technology and Design, welcome to the launch of this Southeast Asia Climate Outlook 2025 report. The Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities, the LKYCIC, is a research institute in SUTD. And the center seeks to stimulate thinking and research on the critical issues of cities and urbanization through the integrated use of technology, design, and policy to provide urban solutions. So we're very excited to be part of the Southeast Asia Climate Outlook Report in 2025. And I really want to express our very deep appreciation to ISEAS, Yusof Ishak Institute, and all our colleagues here for a very productive partnership in producing the report. This year's report carries very special meaning for us. Since 2020, the Southeast Asia Climate Outlook Survey has offered an annual snapshot of how people across the 10 ASEAN member states perceive the challenges of climate change and the progress of climate action. Now, with this 5-year synthesis, we have an opportunity to reflect on how public awareness, governance, and policy priorities have evolved, and what these changing perceptions might mean for the region's next phase of climate response. The 2025 report is very ambitious in scope. Credit to all my colleagues who put it together. It covers topics ranging from, as Mr. Choi has said, energy transition and carbon pricing to fossil fuel subsidies, national policy assessments, and perceptions of international cooperation. It also introduces a set of interlinked themes from the influence of media on climate perceptions to the gaps between realities and public understanding of the energy transition, the alignment between personal and collective climate action, the socio-economic dimensions of policy acceptance, and that widening urban-rural divide in food security. So quite a packed report. And these themes remind us that climate change is not a single issue problem. It impacts very deeply interconnected social, economic, and political dimensions. One of the most striking lessons from this report is how quickly perceptions have shifted in just 5 years, and how those shifts reveal both optimism, but also anxiety. There is growing recognition of climate risk and rising expectations for government and corporate leadership. Yet there also remains uncertainty about how far and how fast the region can move. For researchers and policymakers alike, these findings are not merely descriptive, they are diagnostic. They point to where communication is succeeding, where public trust is fragile and where greater coordination and inclusivity are very urgently needed. The role of cities in addressing climate change is also increasingly being recognized, as demonstrated by the IPCC's decision to include a special report on climate change and cities in the current assessment cycle. Cities are where impacts are most visible and where solutions can be most immediate due to the concentration of people, infrastructure, and innovation capacities that can lead to real transformation. As Southeast Asia is urbanizing at an unprecedented pace, we need to focus efforts in making our cities more climate resilient. At the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities, this urban perspective has always been central to our work on climate mitigation and adaptation. We take a human-centric approach to understand how people experience environmental change, how they perceive public information and policies on climate change, and how technologies and policies can align with their lived realities. We are concerned also with developing a just transition towards net zero, including protecting the vulnerable. More recently, we're studying how cities can be more regenerative, not only aiming to do less bad, but to do more regenerative and restorative planetary ecosystems. This perspective shapes our continuing collaboration with ISEAS. Together, our institutions share a commitment to bridging research, policy, and practice, and to grounding our analysis in the realities of the region. Yesterday, the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities hosted a workshop titled Collaborative Urban Sustainability Transition in Southeast Asia, or CUSC 2025 for short. It brought together scholars and practitioners from across ASEAN to explore how we can strengthen regional research collaboration, build our shared agendas, and develop joint initiatives on pressing issues such as urban heat adaptation and equitable climate adaptation. And many of the participants are here, and I welcome you today. Climate change has no boundaries. Yesterday's workshop is a demonstration that while data and policy frameworks are essential, the real engine of change lies in collaboration. Institutions in Singapore and the wider region can work hand in hand to build trust across boundaries and generate knowledge that's rigorous, regionally grounded, and practically useful for decision-making. Looking ahead, I hope that the findings of the 2025 report can help to inform policy and collaboration. For example, the insights on media influence and public priorities, and the media is here today, it can help refine communication strategies to strengthen public engagement. Understanding socio-economic differences in climate policy acceptance can support the design of more equitable interventions. And for regional and international organizations, the data on perceived leadership and cooperation can guide our strategies for building climate alliances that are responsive to local realities. For us at the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities, the next step is to deepen these insights, not only to document how perceptions evolve, but also to link them with the tangible outcomes of urban and national policy. How are cities implementing adaptation measures? How are citizens adjusting their behaviors? And how can we bridge the gap between public aspiration and institutional action? These are the kinds of questions that can transform perception surveys into tools for policy making and social learning. And as we launch the Southeast Asia Climate Outlook 2025 report, I hope it will serve not just as a record of changing opinions, but as a compass for collective action, one that helps governments, businesses, and communities navigate the path toward a more sustainable and inclusive region. I invite you to read the report. Do let us have your inputs and comments and suggestions on how to improve it, and join us in turning these insights into actionable partnerships. So thank you very much, and I wish everyone a meaningful and fruitful discussion ahead, and I really look forward to the dialogue with SMS Janil. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Cheong. Distinguished guests, I would now like to invite SMS Dr. Janil Puthucheary and Mr. Choi on stage to discuss the theme, Is Southeast Asia Getting Up to Speed on its Climate Ambitions? SMS Dr. Janil Puthucheary is Senior Minister of State at the Ministry of Sustainability and the Environment and the Ministry of Education. He has previously held portfolios at the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Digital Development and Information, and the Ministry of Health. Without further ado, I will now invite Mr. Choi to begin the session, please.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. I'm sure this is the highlight that you've all been waiting for, but for me, it's also particularly a highlight because I've known SMS Janil for a while. And I must say that for those of you who don't know him, he really is a master of the subjects that he has responsibility for. He's also very, very eloquent, and he's also someone who really cares about the topics. So we're very, very privileged to have him here, and I believe he would like to make some opening remarks first about the subject, which I'm sure will span many areas. So please, SMS, I let you take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Choi, for both the introduction as well as setting the bar extremely high, and talking about this subject after yourself and Prof. Cheong have given an exposition is a little bit daunting, but I will try my best. The first point I want to make is just, of course, congratulations to ISEAS and SUTD and all your partners on the study. The study is very useful and very impactful for a variety of reasons we've heard from, but I would add one further reason. The methodology, the fact that it has come from ground-up sources across ASEAN, across Southeast Asia, and its ability then for us to focus our minds on that gap between reality and perception, between policy and anxiety, between intent and lived reality, is in itself extremely useful. And it highlights the importance that we will have to pay attention to, the importance that we have to pay attention to in terms of engaging the ground in our various domestic populations across Southeast Asia. Dealing with climate change is a thorny, wicked, and difficult problem. And bringing along our population is going to be possibly the largest of the implementation problems. Persuading everybody that this is our collective problem, persuading everybody that we have a collective solution, and that this ultimately will benefit all, because it will be difficult to go through the energy transition, it will be difficult to go through our adaptation and mitigation measures, and we will need collective action in order to do so. And so I just wanted to highlight that this ground-up methodology, highlighting and spotlighting the perceptions of people, is in itself extremely useful. The second point I'd like to make is the survey results, to my mind, are extremely interesting in terms of the increasing awareness and willingness to engage in some low-friction activities, but at the same time, an anxiety about your own country's commitment to the high-impact issues, such as, for example, the phasing out or phasing down of coal. And you can see a significant shift. So people are more aware of what's happening around climate change. They are stated to be more willing to do something about it, but at the same time saying, well, maybe my country can delay our phase out or our energy transition. Some of this is likely to be that the intent is now being matched by an understanding of just how difficult this is going to be, that this will impact people in their pockets, this will impact businesses in their operating models, and that nationally this is going to be a difficult process to go through. So there is an understanding of that. And I think that tension between that increasing awareness and increasing willingness to engage, but at the same time an increasing anxiety about the timing, I think is demonstrated through that. What tells us then as a response from states, from government, one is that the role of trust, and especially trust in communication, is increasingly important. And this comes out in the survey as well, but I think we can extend that and understand that from the role of government in engaging our people, building the trust, maintaining cohesion, in order then to deal with the tensions, trade-offs, and anxieties as we go through energy transition and climate adaptation transitions. The second point, and this came out a little bit in the not a little bit, it came out in the study significantly in the sharp difference about perceptions across income levels, the socio-economic status. So the second point is that the process of engaging in energy transition and climate transition has to be matched adequately and properly with policies and programs to then deal with the most vulnerable, those who are most likely displaced, most likely affected, the businesses that are smaller, the lower socioeconomic groups. In other words, the climate transition cannot be dealt with on its own without some consideration to socio-economic policy, a point Prof. Chong also made. And so then, looking at it from the perspective of government, do we have adequate platforms, processes, and trust in those mechanisms, whether these are wealth transfer mechanisms, distributive mechanisms, mechanisms to then help families and businesses. And these have to be in place, these have to be operating, and these then have to be matched to the pace and intensity of climate-specific policies. And you have to take these two in tandem. You have to think about socioeconomic policies in tandem with your climate policies. So just as you have to think about the trust and cohesion together. I thought I'd say a little bit about ASEAN, given that this is ISEAS, and this is also the framing of both the study and our discussion today. ASEAN continues to be, to my mind, an effective platform for multilateral discussions, and we should make full use of this. We are a region that is likely to be able to generate significant numbers, significant volume of high-quality carbon credits. We are likely to be a region which continues to have deepening integration, further developments around trade flows, interoperability of markets, and potentially then interoperability of carbon markets. ASEAN as a platform already on the environment, we have issues that we cooperate on, from haze to marine debris. But more importantly, ASEAN as a platform across our countries, we have cooperated on many difficult issues. Not that we have solved all of them, but we have demonstrated willingness across the member states. We have demonstrated mechanisms and processes that each of us have put up domestically so that we can cooperate as a bloc, and we should take full advantage of these mechanisms and apply them then to all the issues around climate change. The issue of carbon credits is one example, and I think this is a space which is still very much developing. But if we can coordinate better, work towards increasing interoperability of our carbon markets, and match that with increasing cooperation around bringing to bear financing, whether for energy transition, mitigation measures, and adaptation. I think then as a region, we will all do better. There are a number of other things that we could talk about. I don't want my opening remarks to drag on too long, but I am hopeful that we can continue to leverage upon ASEAN as a regional bloc, leverage upon our history of cooperation and collaboration and deepening partnerships, and the nascent and rapidly developing work that we're doing within climate, and we should find ways to take that forward. Turning our attention then to what we're doing in Singapore, you'll be familiar that we are not standing still, and we are pressing ahead with many of our efforts. We have the carbon tax, and we've matched that then with socioeconomic policies to then either address the needs of businesses, energy efficiency grants, resource efficiency grants, or families. They use safe vouchers and rebates to then address the possibility of utility bills rising. So I hope just one small example, but very easy for me to say these are all, in theory, things that one should do, but actually here in Singapore, we have to make sure we are doing those things and implementing it in the way that we think should be best practice. Thinking about climate policies, the carbon tax, our NDCs, our various mitigation measures. but at the same time, matching that with appropriate socio-economic policies to look after the most vulnerable who may be affected as a result. I think in Singapore, our awareness is relatively high, and our trust in government is relatively high. I did see there that perhaps the sense of citizen involvement and advocacy, we could have perhaps some views as to whether it is adequate enough. I have a view looking down at the second order, the details. I saw that it was separated out. You separated out protests and writing to your politician, but then in the executive summary, these were sort of collapsed. I have to say, as a politician who gets written to quite often, I would like for those two avenues of citizen activism to be separate and dealt with separately. And I think most people would see them as two different issues. I'm happy to take questions on these or any of the other issues, and thank you once again for inviting me to join you for this. And congratulations on the very important work. I look forward to the next report coming out and the progress of how this goes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, SMS. Well, we only have about 20 minutes, actually more like 16 left in as scheduled, but we will, of course, overrun a little bit if we have the indulgence of the SMS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask only two questions, one big one and one maybe a narrower one on Singapore. But while I'm doing that and while SMS is giving his reply to this, please be ready, both here in the room as well as online, to ask questions, because this is really your opportunity to do that. And online as well, please do type in your questions, and I will look at it and I will raise it to SMS as and when it comes in. So, if I may, the elephant in the room is COP30. It has just concluded. I think not everybody kind of really understands what really happened and what the outcomes are. Maybe there are different lenses on those outcomes, but in your interpretation of the outcomes, what do you think are the key lessons for Singapore and for also our neighbors, other Southeast Asian governments, and if any also at the ASEAN level?
Thank you. I'll take your opening comment as a reminder that I should stick to time and be terse and concise with my replies. not always straightforward, but I think I'm happy to overrun. By the way, I'm okay for time. I think I would say the key lesson for COP, I would hope that people would take away, is that multilateralism still works and is still worth committing blood, sweat, tears, and all our effort to. Just because it's messy and it's difficult and we didn't always get the outcomes that we wanted, we certainly should not abandon this type of approach. That actually quite a lot of things got done. There were disappointed interests, but one of the things I'm constantly reminded by people in this space, and I was thinking about this as Mr. Choi, you made your remarks, absent Paris, we would be on track for a 4-degree warming. I mean, that's the process has achieved something. Now, 2.3 degrees is not good, but it's better than 4 degrees. And we should, I think, take away from the process that multilateralism is what brought us that delta. And therefore, if there's going to be more delta, we should pay quite a lot of attention to what it would take to keep the processes alive, to keep the parties engaged at the table, except that it's going to be messy. Certainly in the short term, it's going to be messy and difficult. But I think the overall ambitions and aspirations should be kept alive. For Singapore, I think it's a reminder and a validation of the importance of continued international engagements. And if you look at the sort of, this is something that only Singaporeans and only a certain group of Singaporeans will pay attention to, is the extent to which our delegation was involved in chairing various subgroups, taking ownership of various processes. There is a trust that the international arena has in Singapore and Singaporeans. And this is not because we turned up to COP. It's because of many decades of approach approaches in this. And it shows that in a way, it's an affirmation and a validation of our approach to international partnerships, to international agreements, sticking quite assiduously to the principles and agreements that we have signed up to and trying our best to make it operate. So my TLDR is for the world and for Singapore is we have to keep working at multilateralism. For ASEAN, in a way, I think there was some discussion and issues about the role of ASEAN at COP and whether as a bloc and whether as a region more we could do. However that discussion plays out, the importance of ASEAN then as a platform for multilateralism and engagement, I think, is highlighted even more. And I think we should make sure that we continue to work on that.
Thank you very much. I see questions coming in online, or rather one question, two questions so far, but remember, I will always give priority to those in the room, so get ready to put up your hands shortly. Let me just give my second and last question that I will give to SMS from here, and that's, I promised I wanted to drill down into Singapore. And as you already mentioned, there is a peculiarity in the respondents in Singapore. I mean, we are a government that has high trust, and because we have high trust, we have what is recognized by our Singapore respondents as a good policy, a policy that is seen to be already taking action. And there is, in the other countries, a kind of correlation between the government's recognition of the governments being highly rated and the participation of the respondents themselves in low-friction activities, low-friction forms of advocacy. But in Singapore, it doesn't quite seem to be the case. The rating for citizens' actions sort of falls below the median line. Why do you think that is the case? Are they so reliant on the government? Is it a typical, we expect the government to do everything for us kind of thing?
I have to choose my words carefully here. I think on one level, I hope some of it is because as a government and as a state, we are pushing ahead and hopefully pushing ahead faster than the lowest common denominator of what our citizenry wants. Looking a little bit beyond the horizon to see what it is we need 5, 10, 15 years, as opposed to merely solving the problems of now. And we're in a privileged position to be able to do that, given our resources and some of our historical success. And so then, perhaps, if the government is pushing a little bit faster and a little bit further than what the median citizen is expecting, this may come across in this type of behavior. That's one possibility. I mean, you look at, for example, the 10 implementation agreements, Article 6 implementation agreements that we have signed, the fact that we have already started working through the procurement from places like Ghana, Paraguay, Peru, the speed at which we then progress with our carbon tax, the level, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think these are necessarily, if you go back 5 or 10 years and you said by 2025 to our citizens, would Singapore have done this? Not necessarily something they would have imagined at that time. So that's one possibility. I think the second possibility, possibly, Singaporeans are not shy to contact their politicians and ask us all kinds of things. My constituents all have my WhatsApp number, and they have many things that they would like to connect with me about and tell me about. And they do so also for climate change. But I think in the nature of engagement with politics and politicians, we are more likely to hear from people who are having difficulty with a policy. And so what I'm more likely to hear about is requests from my constituents, perhaps, who would like to have more climate vouchers, would like a little bit more assistance for their business in the transition, would like to ensure that we are looking after the most vulnerable in our society as we progress with what are impactful policies that will reshape our economy. And in a way, that's not incorrect. It suggests that we are progressing at a significant pace, and Singaporeans understand that these are policies and changes that will have an impact economy-wide, society-wide, and are most concerned about the most vulnerable. So I'm hoping that the second hypothesis, both of these hypotheses may be partially true. And so hopefully there's a positive reason why you see that finding in your public perception survey. I think critics might suggest negative possibilities. Maybe Singaporeans are less likely to care, or maybe we're too comfortable, or maybe we're leaving it all to the government. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think there is a significant proportion of our population, inspired by youth activism as well and youth advocacy, that really do understand the impact of climate change and increasingly are looking for leadership and looking for government to then demonstrate that leadership in society, that we are willing to take the important and hard decisions. I think Singaporeans do care. And I think there is no lack of concern. It's just the way forward is not so clear. And so I think that's something that we have to spend a bit of time thinking about and co-developing with our citizenry, as we have to do across ASEAN. One of the things I think I take away from the study is that co-development and that engagement of citizenry as we think through some of these policies and as we implement these policies is absolutely vital.
Thank you very much. In the room, anyone would like to take this opportunity? Yes, please. The gentleman over here, please come up to the mic and ask the question. Please identify yourself first.
Yes, good morning, Professor and Excellencies. My name is Puthucheary. I'm from Cambodia ASI Research Group. Yeah, I'm very interested in what the Excellency mentioned regarding the country commitment and what really happened. For example, like you mentioned, like they delay action or something. And also I heard during the opening speak that each country have ambitious goal. And also, as I see in ASEAN, most of the country, they have been set 2050 as a carbon neutrality strategy. And I also want to know about Singapore, what are the key priority toward the carbon neutrality, and do you think we can achieve the regional carbon neutrality by 2050? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Well, the short answer to the second half of your question is we must try. And honestly, to say in 2025 that you know what's going to happen 25 years from now, I think is uncertain. You don't know where technology is going to be, whether it's carbon capture, whether it's renewable, and you don't know what the economic conditions are going to be over the next 25 years, and whether some countries' growth will be impacted, some countries will have opportunities that they want to take advantage of. So the short answer is, I don't know, but we have to try as hard as we can to make sure that we reach those targets. For Singapore, we've already submitted our NDCs. We have a plan to peak emissions and then achieve net zero around about 2050. But the issue is not necessarily only saying that. The question is, as we turn around to our population and we turn around internally to our policy landscape, what are the proof points along the way? What are the milestones that people can see that we are putting in place? And I think these are equally important, because if we demonstrate effort, milestones, significant achievements along the way, and then our marksmanship 25 years out is not so great, I think generally the trust and cohesion for whatever it is we need to do in 2050 to take the next step will be there. But if we don't demonstrate that, then the trust and cohesion will fray, and then very difficult to bring along the whole of our society. So we have committed. We've committed to carbon tax. It's already been implemented. We've committed to raising it. We've committed to cleaner energy vehicles, selling the last pure internal combustion engine in 2030. We've got in place, we've participated in the regional power grids, Lao PDR, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore connection for the supply of renewable energy. We've shifted, this is years ago, and then now to LNG, away from other types of fossil fuels. We are well ahead of our solar deployment targets. I think we've exceeded 50% of the target well in advance. So we can turn around and say internally, domestically, we are doing our best, we are moving as fast as we can, please come along with us. We can also turn around to international partners and say, what we committed to, we are working towards, and we are going to get there. And this is important because the progress towards net zero, the progress towards our climate ambition, there is an interrelating dynamic, right? If you are the one progressing, constraining your economic growth, and someone else is not operating in good faith, they're having the opportunity for economic growth. And so everybody is looking to see, are we all progressing together? Are we all in lockstep? And therefore, we're all doing the right thing and it's fair for everybody. And this is one of the reasons why we keep emphasizing the importance of the interoperability of our markets, the exchange around carbon credits, that not just you develop your own carbon credits, you offset your own NDCs. You have interoperability of carbon credits, interoperability of technological solutions. Then we are progressing regionally and then ideally globally. Globally, a little bit harder, as we've just discussed, but certainly regionally we can do better. I don't know if that answers your question, sir, but I thank you for your question. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just give one more questioner in the room, then I'll move to the long list that's building up online. So perhaps the gentleman, you were the second, you were the one to put, yes, you. So I'll let you have the.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Janil. My name is Song Lin. I'm with GSCC. My question is, from the study, as well as from your own experience, what do you think are the maybe top 2 or 3 misperceptions among the public in Singapore as well as in the region that are holding back our climate ambition, holding back our climate action and energy transition in the region?
I think for the study, I will let the academics who did the study answer the question. I think you'll have a chance to hear from them later on. From my own perspective, I think the biggest public misperception is perhaps how much is already happening. And I think it's one of those things where, you get used to it very quickly. And so it is important, I think, to continually remind, this is not just only in Singapore, I think across all our countries, it's a constant reminder of how much effort is already being put in and what is happening today that is actually part of our climate adaptation or climate mitigation strategy. Whether it's about recycling, about the use of electrical vehicles, whether it's about the reduction in consumption or even our water efficiency. These are things which very rapidly become normal. Now, it's not wrong to then raise the bar, raise the ambition, but useful if people are reminded that part of the reason why we need to do these things is not just only to reduce cost and do the right thing, but it is also then to achieve some of our climate ambitions. So rather than only focusing on what's the next delta, useful to pay attention to what we've already achieved, because sometimes, I think for the public, understanding how we achieved what we have today gives a confidence that we can take the next step. Otherwise, if you don't have an appreciation of our historical ability to make change our society, change our business model, change our energy mix, improve our water efficiency, reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, etc., 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 you look to the future and it feels impossible. It feels I can't do anything, you can't do anything, nobody can do anything. So sometimes I think we do have to correct the misperception, there's nothing we can do. Correct the misperception, there's nothing that we have done. And correct the misperception that collectively we can't achieve a very high level of ambition. For the study, I don't know if this pans out, but perhaps I'll let the academic faculty who actually did the study answer on their behalf.
Thank you. I'm going to take a question now from the online audience. There is a person called Ryan Park who has actually put a couple of questions in the Q&A box. But I'll just kind of condense it into the essence of his question is that people are using the terminology net zero, including companies. And over time, I guess the problem is the definition of net zero. And of course, as you're very familiar with how this really net zero really is not just one ministry's responsibility, but many, in fact, across the entire economy. And his question is whether whether we're addressing this correctly. I mean, are we getting the definition right? For example, electrification of cars, which he cites something that's happening in Singapore as part of Singapore Green Plan. But it may be that we are doing the right thing, but then, in promoting this, you've got lithium, you've got critical minerals, which actually also leads to carbon, proliferation somewhere else. So how do we, are we getting to grips, is the world getting to grips with what net zero really means, or are we kind of just running away from the, ignoring those things which perhaps are inconvenient?
Well, thank you for the question. And I would say the first thing we're not doing is ignoring it. We are actually, all of us across a number of nations and a number of institutions, we're thinking very hard about this, but it is not exactly clear what the answer is. Indeed, there is a definitional problem, and it comes down to an accounting problem. How do you account for the carbon? How do you account for the carbon credit? And we have many systems being developed. But at the same time, you have a significant amount of work trying to then find systems of standardization and interoperability. Vera, Gold Standard, Corsa, IVC, VCM, a whole variety of efforts. And it's a little bit like the history of currencies. Every country developed their own currency, but in the end, you don't want to surrender your own currency. You have to find a way for my currency and your currency to exchange. And most importantly, for all countries to agree, how does your currency exchange? So that's the kind of direction we need to go for carbon accounting. And we're not there yet. We're still at the stage where people look and say, well, my carbon credits are high quality and worthwhile, trustworthy from now till the end of time. I don't trust yours. And, because you are using this standard, I'm using that standard. I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but that's the extreme of the sentiment. We have to get to the point where when I say this is worth one carbon credit, you accept it. And when you say this is worth one carbon metric ton, offset, whatever, I accept it. And our accounting will need to be interoperable. The work is happening, and we have agreements, we have platforms, ASEAN, bilateral, multilateral, but we haven't yet settled. It'll take some time. What will work against this is if people say, I don't need to interoperate. In other words, I will develop my own carbon credit accounting mechanism, and I will use that to offset my own NDCs. I'm never going to sell a carbon credit externally, and I'm never going to buy a carbon credit internally. If someone did that for currency, you would say you're leaving money on the table, you're losing out on an opportunity, and perhaps not so good for your economy, not so good for your people. I don't think anyone intends to do that for carbon credits, but in the short term, that may be the easy win. The question then is whether, from a government perspective, from a policy perspective, you set out to make sure that your internal domestic carbon credit markets and mechanisms will be internationally operable. For Singapore, we are not likely to produce many carbon credits. And so, our interest is in the ability to then buy from a wide range of countries. As I say, 10 implementation agreements, already procuring Paraguay, Peru, and Ghana. But I think for other countries where there may be the opportunity to locally produce carbon credits and locally offset NDC, I would argue that there is benefit to then seeing those carbon credits as potentially internationally tradable. It will hold the producers of the carbon credits to a higher bar. It will potentially result in benefits locally for the economy as there's a price discovery mechanism. But most importantly, the production of carbon credits and your accounting will then be internationally trusted. And so then when you say my dollar is worth this or my carbon credit is worth this, most people will agree. And this is what Mr. Ryan was asking about, which is then you can trace the accounting, whether it's about the carbon the carbon required to produce one EV or the carbon credit required to then offset that one EV. We all agree, well, this chap is playing fair by the rules. And so I think this is an area we have to spend quite a lot of time and effort working on. But actually, I think that is what a lot of our attention is focused on, how to be able to then deal with the definitions and the carbon credits. Carbon accounting, I beg your pardon.
I'm going to give take one more question from the online, but after that, I'm going to come back to the audience here, so get ready. This question is from Mr. Dipinder Ratanhawa. He's from RSIS, NTU. His question is about polarization. He says that Southeast Asia is not significantly affected by the extreme polarization on attitudes towards climate change that we've seen in other developed countries. These schisms have in fact deepened along other factors such as widening inequalities. So far in ASEAN, there is also widening gaps in income distribution. So, and maybe on the horizon, there isn't so much that is likely to see a reversal. So do you think that this polarization is going to become a problem in ASEAN over time? And could things like a decentralized governance, including more grassroots education, help to address this kind of potential polarization of the future?
Well, I think if unaddressed and if it worsens, polarization, loss of social cohesion, tribalism, whichever lens you want to apply to it, will be a problem for our climate ambition, because you need that sense of collective action. It is, you have to be willing to pay the price of the carbon tax, deal with the carbon accounting in order then to offset nationally, but also then think about how you redistribute and help those most affected. So if there is increasing polarization, whether it's along geographical lines, socio-economic status, an increasing sense of inequality, which is left unaddressed, then the sentiment against the policies which are necessary for dealing with climate change will be very hard to carry. So having that sense of cohesion, that trust in society, that trust in institutions is going to be very important. What is the solution is not so clear to say that there is one approach across the whole of ASEAN or regionally that you can approach. Our societies are very, very different. Our geographies are very, very different. So decentralization of government may be a tool. I'm not sure it's the solution. And some of the things that we have to do, whether it's carbon taxation, potentially purchasing technologies for around carbon capture, long-term large investments in the infrastructure required for renewable energy, these are very hard to carry at the local grassroots level. And you need that strong sense of central government taking care of your whole country, your whole society, long-term view, and then you have to carry that. The issues to do about looking after the vulnerable, those who are displaced as a result of climate change, those who perhaps are affected by the taxation policies and need assistance, small businesses, individual families, those are better dealt with at a decentralized level because you can then handhold individuals and families and businesses. So I think the answer to the question is you need both the mechanisms to be able to think about decentralized policy implementation, but I don't think it's the only tool. I think you need a very strong sense of national policy at the center, but it is a useful mechanism.
Now we're going to take, I'm going to take 2 or 3 questions from the audience, and then after that we'll turn over to SMS. He's more than capable of remembering all your questions. So
I will write them down.
I think Elisa is one. So then after that, the gentleman who is at the back, yeah. And is there a third? Is there a third person? Well, you think about it. That's probably your last chance. So, okay, Elisa.
Thank you, Ms. Choi. Thank you, Dr. Janil. My question is a little bit it may or may not be something that you can answer, but 2027, of course, is the ASEAN Chairmanship year. And I was wondering whether you think or you feel that there should be a climate agenda within the Singapore's chairmanship in 2027. And I ask this because I've had conversations with international organizations that see Southeast Asia as a potential model for future just and green transitions and economic growth. And in the future, it could be a type of currency if we do it well. And so how can we use this opportunity to actually make sure that this region actually comes as an economic model for the future? Thank you.
I'm sure they've thought about it, but that would be up to him whether he wants to review at this point in time. But the second question, can we have the second question? Yes. And after this gentleman, the third one, please. So please identify yourself.
Good morning, SMS. My name is Dennis Lee. I'm from Shantou University. Just a question. First of all, SMS mentioned, and rightly so, that there is a need for climate change policies to be matched with socio-economic policies. But there's a growing concern, a mismatch between policies and implementation. And you mentioned that there is a need to highlight and what has been done, right, to give public confidence. I think that's all good. The challenge, I think, for me at least, is that what has been done at the local level in terms of education to change behavior for generations. Because if the practice doesn't match the policies, then the policies would deem to be irrelevant to the citizenry. I'm not aware of, because probably lack of media strategy, I didn't hear of any of intentional educational policies that will address this important climate action and how it relates to the citizens and what can citizens do. And I think this a big part of it is through long-term education, so that it can be put into daily practice. I think if we don't do that as a policy, as an intentional policy of education, then our educational policy tend to be focused on economic drive and how to be better, how to secure the economic future, which is important. But then the daily living there's a mismatch between what we do and what the government is trying to do in terms of climate policy. So I wonder if you could comment on that, and if there's any government policies on education that I'm unaware of. Thank you.
Is there any third question? Your last chance now. Okay, yes.
Hi, I'm Claudia from Taopao. So in the survey, there is like a decline in supporting of phasing out coal. And for Singapore, I think most of them supports to phase out coal by 2030. So I wonder if the government have any official stance about phasing out coal, and if there is anything that the government is thinking of doing or has been already doing to educate the public about this topic. Thank you.
Okay, SMS, over to you.
Maybe I'll go in reverse order. The issue of phase out for coal less relevant for us because 99 point whatever or 98% of our energy is from liquefied natural gas, LNG. So coal is not an issue for us here in Singapore. I mean, this is largely across the region. But I could perhaps again let the academic faculty then talk about what's happening in the rest of the region and why the other ASEAN countries where coal is being used, unlike in Singapore where coal is being used in the other countries to generate electricity, why is it then there are anxieties about the phase-out time? So I said less relevant for the Singapore audience and more on a regional basis. I think for Mr. Lee's question, the issue is in a way it's very apt the way you phrased it. Look, people are not aware of these things as climate relevant, but in a way you could make a case that many things, almost everything, could potentially be climate relevant, and the audience, our public, may not be aware of it as a climate change education or as a climate change social policy, but understand that it's important. Whether it's about water conservation, the importance of recycling, the maintenance of biodiversity, or even, well, the importance of public transport, walk, cycle, ride. These are all, in each of these, there is an element of resource efficiency, a potential shift towards sustainability, and will have an impact on our climate ambition, our net zero target, our NDCs, and so forth. We do have climate-specific education programs. They're less visible, perhaps, and certainly for the adult population, we don't have sort of a school program or a curriculum that you can point to. But many towns, many divisions, my division certainly will have a climate action group, volunteers, very enthusiastic, wanting to drive recycling, support biodiversity, and all the many, many, many things that we have to do, and looking to mobilize the citizenry, mobilize their neighbors, get them to, whether it's about recycling cardboard, appreciating the biodiversity, or many of the other things, get involved. As I say, their efforts are less visible. We will certainly be trying very hard to raise the awareness. At MSc, we have a great interest in this. When we think about the climate ambitions and our policies and our interventions, actually on a regular basis, we want to make sure that these are not seen as only top-down, just a carbon tax. This is the role for government. We have the Go Green movement, Go 25. All of these are clean and green. Each of these have a role for the citizenry, and that's not a nice extra, an add-on, or a side gig. Actually, it is to make the point that we cannot do this by policy fiat at all. Actually, you need to then bring people along and have people change their behavior. In each of these, what we see year on year is an increasing participation. And increasing participation also includes an increasing number of people who are then active participants or taking a role to then lead the activity, drive the innovation, come up with new models. And we've put some money to it with the SG Eco Fund, which can then drive citizen participation, citizen development. So all of this, I think, has had an impact. So now when I have youth dialogues, I go to the Institutes of Higher Learning, the willingness and the interest for young people to then step up and step forward and get involved in climate action has significantly increased. It's one of the top things I get asked about. How can I participate? Where can I sign up? What can I do? I think it's not to say that the older generation are unaware, but I think there is perhaps after you've raised a family, lived a while, run a business, you understand it's not just about this high ambition, it's got to translate into very specific things. What do I do with my waste? How do I procure my products? How is it that I can save energy? So translating it down to something specific, operable, which may not at first glance come across as climate ambition, but actually is very, very important in reducing our resource take, having a shift in terms of our energy mix, and dealing with all the impact of climate change. So I think that's happening. And that leads me then to the first question Ms. Lisa had asked, which is that, yes, we could make a pitch for it. I mean, I think at MSc, we'd be more than happy to say, look, how about this to MFA? I don't think it's been settled yet, but you don't know what 2027 is going to be like and what will be the key priorities at the time. But you could also make a case, well, what about the second order details, the implementation details? And maybe instead of saying you want a climate agenda, high level COP kind of thing, you say, well, what's the specific thing that we should work on? What's the specific implementation that we should work on? And perhaps we should think about it. There actually are platforms at ASEAN already for much of the climate change. And we should continue to use ASEAN, and I hope we are convinced that whether or not this is the top line item in 27, it is certainly something that we should continue to work on up to 27 and long after, and continue to use ASEAN as a platform for realizing our climate ambition, and actually move then down to the sort of second, third order implementation details. What applies to us as individuals and households should apply to us as countries and regions as well. Not just have the ambition, not just have the stated commitments, but actually work through the implementation and execution. And I think that's where the rubber will hit the road over the next few years. And that's where we need to then learn from each other, implement best practices, and move together as a regional bloc.
Thank you very much, SMS. I think it's already well over the originally programmed time, so I thank you for your indulgence. I will not push our indulgence upon you much longer. So we'll call this to an end, but I think we're very grateful to SMS. Also, I think the discussion has kind of made it clear that many of the things about the climate change agenda are very complex. and they are actually going into many, many different fields. And that really kind of, I guess, highlights the importance of some of the work that research can contribute to it, because I think in terms of understanding attitudes, in terms of understanding policies, in terms of understanding how industries affect each other, how to account it properly, and also in terms of implementation, what we in ISEAS are doing, what LKYCIC is doing can definitely contribute to helping to solve this problem as we move forward. So please join me in thanking SMS for all that he has said for us. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to take a picture up here before SMS goes down, so that, and then we ask all the speakers in the panel to also join us up here. So we take this picture, and then after that, we'll go down.
Thank you, SMS, for your generous sharing. Please join me once again in thanking SMS for gracing our launch event today. His rich insights will be valuable food for thought as we dive into the key findings of our report. Before we move on to our discussion panel, we will be taking a 5-minute break to refresh the stage. So distinguished guests, please feel free to grab a drink and stretch your legs and join us back here at 11:19 a.m. Thank you. Distinguished guests, welcome back to our launch event. Without further ado, we will now continue with a presentation on the key findings of our report, followed by a discussion panel. I would like to first briefly introduce each of our discussion panelists. Firstly, our moderator, Ms. Sharon Seah, is Senior Fellow and Coordinator of the Climate Change in Southeast Asia Program at ISEAS. She is the lead author of the Southeast Asia Climate Outlook Survey reports from 2020 to 2024. Professor Mely Caballero-Anthony holds the President's Chair in International Relations and Security Studies at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, RSIS, Nanyang Technological University, where she also serves as head of the Center for Non-Traditional Security Studies and Associate Dean for External Engagement. Her research focuses on regionalism and multilateralism in the Asia-Pacific, non-traditional security, and global governance, among other topics. Ms. Paramita Mohamad is the Chief Executive Officer and Principal Consultant of Communication for Change, an Indonesian consulting firm specializing in research-driven strategic communications for social change. Dr. Harvey is Professorial Research Fellow at the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities at the Singapore University of Technology and Design. Dr. Harvey's research focuses on urban futures, citizen urban science, and policy making, as well as nature-society interactions. To kick off the panel discussions, I would now like to invite Ms. Melnda Martinus and Dr. Samuel Chng to share key findings from the report. Ms. Melnda Martinus is lead researcher of climate change at the Climate Change in Southeast Asia Program at ISEAS. Dr. Samuel Chng is Research Assistant Professor at the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities, where he leads both the Urban Psychology Lab and the Positive City Lab. Without further ado, Ms. Martinus and Dr. Chng, the podium is yours.
Thank you very much, Yahweh. Can we present the slides, please? All right. Thank you, everyone. The Southeast Asia Climate Outlook Survey 2020 to 2024 is a compilation of our annual surveys conducted in the past 5 years. Under the theme Understanding Regional Attitudes Towards Climate Change, this 5-year report provides snapshots of public opinion on climate change across the 10 ASEAN member states, highlighting how perceptions have evolved and what they reveal about the region's climate governance, policy awareness, and advocacy. The survey was conducted entirely online. English was the primary language, with translations introduced from 2021 onwards to reach out to a wider audience. The median time to complete the survey ranged from 9 minutes in 2020 to 13 minutes in 2024, reflecting the increase in the number of survey questions over time. The year-to-year distribution of respondents is shown in the summary table here. The survey received more than 7,600 respondents over 5 years, with country representation becoming more balanced over time. The surveys are also representative across various demographics, including age, gender, educational level, affiliation, and socio-economic status. However, it is worth noting that the respondent may lean towards certain demographics. Nearly half hold a bachelor's degree or equivalent, and those aged 21 to 35 consistently represent the largest age group. The report is structured around 6 findings. First, the impact of media on climate perceptions. Second, realities versus public perceptions on energy transition. Third, shared burden, aligning personal and climate action, and public climate action. Fourth, the socio-economic dimensions of climate policy acceptance. Fifth, the rural-urban divide in food security. And sixth, rethinking climate alliances, leadership and cooperation in ASEAN. These 6 themes were selected not only for their statistical significance and recurring presence across survey years, but also for their practical policy relevance that resonates with ongoing global and regional climate discourses. Now let's delve into the 6 findings. First, the impact of media on climate perceptions. Findings from multiple years of the Southeast Asia Climate Outlook Survey show a clear link between media use and climate perceptions. Respondents who mainly rely on mainstream sources such as newspapers, radio, television, and major online news sites are more likely to be climate conscious. In this group, almost 75% believe climate change is either a serious and immediate threat to their country or an issue that requires close monitoring. By comparison, only 66% of those who primarily use social media and messaging platforms share this view. The divergence between media consumers is particularly pronounced in countries like Indonesia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. In these countries, climate-conscious respondents are concentrated among consumers of traditional media, whereas climate deniers are more likely to rely on social media. So looking at this pattern, there is a greater need to understand the misinformation landscape on digital platforms. Many studies on social media and climate change globally show quite conflicting trends. Some studies indicate that social media can amplify underrepresented voices, such as providing a platform for climate activists, but it also carries risk, including echo chambers and disinformation, which may limit people's ability to form informed judgments. The second finding focuses on the gap between realities and public perceptions on the energy transition. Between 2022 and 2024, regional support for an immediate coal phase-out declined, while support for delaying it to 2030 or even 2040 increased. Interestingly, although respondents in countries highly dependent on coal for electricity generation, such as Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Vietnam, still show majority support for an immediate phase-out, these same countries recorded a sharp decline in such support and a growing presence to delay abatement until 2030. For example, in Cambodia, support for an immediate coal phase-out fell dramatically from almost 73% in 2022 to 19% in 2023, and further to 13% in 2024. Respondents in coal-less dependent countries such as Myanmar and Singapore showed the lowest level of support for an immediate phase-out among all country categories. In both countries, there is a stronger acceptance of a 2030 timeline for phasing out coal. So looking at this pattern, it is important to acknowledge that coal is still perceived as essential to regional energy security. However, the momentum for coal phase-out should be maintained by highlighting the economic and environmental costs of inaction and ensuring credible transition plans with clear timelines, measurable targets, and also consistent implementation. I'd like to pass the mic to Dr. Samuel.
Okay, I'll take us through the next 3 findings. The third finding is on the shared burden, aligning personal and public climate action. Okay, so across Southeast Asia, one clear pattern emerges. When people perceive that the government is acting with urgency, they themselves are more likely to engage in everyday climate-supportive behaviors. And this includes following climate news and adopting more sustainable lifestyle practices. So these low-risk actions dominate region-wide, with about 3 in 4 respondents doing at least one of such activity. But what is equally striking is how rare political advocacy remains. Only about 1 in 9 respondents engage in higher risk political actions, such as protests or contacting political representatives. And statistically, the perceived urgency of government action is negatively associated with these forms of activism. In fact, what we saw was that when people believe that the government is already acting, they are less likely to sign petitions, attend protests, or mobilize others for climate causes. So what we see here is a very clear shared burden dynamic in Southeast Asia. Citizens are willing to act, but mostly in low-risk individual ways. More contentious forms of advocacy only rise when people perceive that the government is not doing enough. We also see very different national profiles of trust and engagement, as highlighted in the heat maps over here, where some countries show high trust but low advocacy, while others show the opposite. Yet some show high levels in both, and some countries show low levels in both. Overall, the findings suggest that strengthening public climate action will require reinforcing the sense that citizens and governments both have a role to play, not one or the other. For the fourth finding, it focuses on the socio-economic dimensions of climate policy acceptance. Across 2023 to 2024, where socio-economic status or SES data was collected, the pattern is consistent. Higher SES respondents are more likely to say yes to carbon tax and fossil fuel subsidy removal, while the middle and lower SES groups are more likely to be uncertain. The share of unsure responses also rises, especially in the middle SES group for 2024 for fossil fuel subsidy removal. So this reflects a very practical concern. Lower income groups tend to feel the short-term financial burden of energy prices increase more acutely. So even if they understand the long-term benefits, the immediate cost implications remain front of mind. So this has two implications for policy design. First, fair transition measures such as rebates, tiered pricing, or targeted support are essential to maintain broad public support. Second, clear, consistent communication is needed to help lower SES groups understand how these policies work and what protections are in place. So put simply, the region is not rejecting climate policies outright. Rather, people with fewer resources are more cautious, not because they disagree with the goals, but because they are uncertain how these measures will affect their daily lives. So this nuance here is crucial. For the fifth finding, we focus on the rural-urban divide in food security. Despite being closer to farms and food production areas, we found that rural residents are more likely to experience food insecurity. So 22% of rural respondents said they experienced food insecurity all or most of the time, compared to 16% of urban residents. So what's driving this? So across both urban and rural respondents, the number one reason for food insecurity is rising food prices, an effect that is strongly amplified by climate impacts on agricultural use. So climate change comes in as the second most important cause, indicating recognition of its impact. Looking at country-level patterns then highlights interesting differences. For example, urban Indonesia says that climate change is ranked as the primary cause of food insecurity. In rural Indonesia, rising food prices ranks first. In the Philippines, both rural and urban respondents attribute the second cause not to climate change, but to the lack of agricultural investment. So these findings show that food insecurity in Southeast Asia is not only a climate issue, it is deeply connected to governance, agriculture investment, and rural development. So as the region moves towards low-carbon, climate-resilient futures, addressing rural food insecurity will be fundamental to ensuring that rural communities are not left behind. And if climate transitions is to be just and inclusive, food security and the rural-urban divide must be part of the conversation. So I'll pass back to Melnda to wrap it up.
The last but not least finding is on rethinking climate alliances, leadership, and cooperation in ASEAN. Southeast Asia recognizes that it contributes significantly to global emissions and must play an active role in climate mitigation. As the majority of countries in the region are developing countries, the region continues to rely on long-time development partners as climate role models and as sources of support, especially through climate finance and technology transfer. From 2021 to 2024, as shown in the chart on the left, respondents consistently identified Japan, the US, the EU, and China as key climate leaders, although their rankings change over time. In the 2024 survey, Japan ranked first for the first time, seen as contributing most to global efforts to meet the Paris Agreement goals. The EU, which held the top position from 2021 to 2023, fell to second place in 2024, followed closely by the US in third. When asked which country leads in global climate innovation, such as in developing renewable energy technologies, green buildings, and nature-based solutions, respondents again identified the same 4 countries, with Japan taking first place, as shown in the chart on the right. Notably, perceptions of the EU and China have shifted over time. Regional respondents increasingly view China as a proactive partner in sharing climate expertise. Support rose from only 10% in 2020 to 16% in 2024. Meanwhile, the share identifying the EU dropped sharply from 28% in 2020 to 16% in 2024. Despite the importance of dialogue partners, it is necessary to assess their influence objectively. So drawing on data from the Lowy Institute Southeast Asia AdMap, the figure on the left shows that Japan, EU member states, and institutions, Korea, Australia, and China are the main sources of climate-related finance for the region. However, data also indicates that most of the contributions, especially from the top 3 providers, as we can see here, Japan, the EU, and Korea, come in the form of loans rather than ODA or grants. The climate action tracker ratings shown on the right also provide a useful benchmark for evaluating the climate leadership of dialogue partners. According to these ratings, persistent gaps in ambition and delivery, especially in climate finance, remain a major concern among these parties. Many Southeast Asian countries struggle to meet their climate commitments due to insufficient financial support. Progress ultimately depends on climate finance that is delivered and on the ambition and credibility of global partners. To advance its climate and development goals, the region must also explore more creative financing options. So with that, we would like to conclude our presentation. I would like to invite my colleague Sharon and the panelists to discuss the findings. Thank you very much.
Testing. Yes, thank you. A very good morning and a warm welcome to ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute and to our joint event with the LKYCIC. We've heard from the 2 presenters the key findings of this survey. So as an opening question, and I will start with a dialogue with our panelists before I open it to the floor and also to our online audience. Don't worry, you'll get an opportunity. What in the set of results would seem the most intriguing, disturbing, or most surprising? Because you all come from very different areas of expertise. Ibu Paramita's from Indonesia, and Prof. Mely comes from the Philippines, but she works here in Singapore, and Professor Neo is from Singapore, of course. So really, in your own context, in your own national context, and with your perspective of a regional lens, what is most surprising to you? What is disturbing? Maybe I'll start with Ibu Paramita.
Okay, thank you for having me here. So first, I want to express my appreciation for this survey. I think a comparison between countries in Asia is very well appreciated. We can actually, as you already analyzed on the lens of dependency to coal, how the public respond to certain policy proposal. I think it would be great to actually do a lot of analysis in terms of geography, specifically ones who are prone to climate-related disaster. Secondly, economic structure, not only dependence on extractive industry, and by extractive, I don't mean only coal. In my country, it would be crude palm oil. And inequality, perceived or real, related to acceptance on non-populist fiscal policies related to just energy transition, and trust in the government, which, having been coming from Indonesia, I would measure it indirectly by perception of corruptions in the government. Okay, so that's, thank you, very well appreciated. In Indonesia, our organization have done very big survey, definitely not 11 minutes, but almost to 30 to 75 minutes, 60 to 75 minutes in researching climate change perception, energy transition. We also test several messages, a lot of messages and narratives on climate change and energy transition policies. So I would like to give my perspective, what's surprising, what's not so surprising. Firstly is that I think we have to be very careful in using the word climate denial. I think what happened in Indonesia, for example, and I don't think that's far-fetched to see it probably in similar countries, what happened is climate ignorance rather than denialism related to ideology or religion. So it's pretty much about claiming that they have heard the term, but when we ask them what's the right term for them, most of them still think that it's related to seasonal change rather than the climate change happened to greenhouse emission, etc., etc. So asking definition, whether they've heard, whether what they mean by climate change, fossil fuel and renewables, only 26% of Indonesians have heard the term renewable energy in the urban, in Gen Z and Gen Millennial, and that's on 2023, so probably now 30%. So it's always important to ask whether they understand the term, because we cannot take climate ignorance for granted. So the question about climate change, carbon tax, I think that needs to be taken with cautiously. Also, related to climate ignorance, I think it's important to segregate and be very transparent about the sampling. Some respondents are recruited from ISEAS mailing list. Well, that's not what I, as typical Indonesians or typical Cambodians or typical Thais, right? So I think a segregation between respondents by recruitment is important. Also, I wanna point out the sameness. That's something that I'm not surprised at all, and I am building what SMS is referring to. It's very refreshing for me in Indonesian to call a high minister or official with an abbreviation. Your Excellency, SMS. It's like this gap between citizen action, participate climate. We call it citizen climate action, and whether they're do it personally or collectively. I think it's not surprising. There are things that lead people to climate action or collective action in any sort. First is that there only be a climate or collective action if the people are cognizant about structural issues. They have to know that what's on their menu in their daily life is actually heavily influenced by the government, not by their own action. You can recycle until the cow comes home. It's not going to change anything about mixed energy in my country, for example, So, or in another country. So first, there has to be this awareness of structural issues. This is a big gap. Secondly, in any collective action, you need to have a sense of moral violation. And it creates group-based anger. But you also need to have politicized identity. I'm with the defender of environment. I am the defender of climate. I am the anti-coal or whatever. And thirdly, and this is important, collective advocacy, that your group can actually influence the government. I don't think this is something that I can generally say secured in Asian countries. So really about that, I appreciate really very much about this. I know the researchers are concerned about fake media, fake news in the social media. I think the worry, at least in Indonesia, is more about, I think there's a confounding variables in that. Actively seeking information and not actively seeking information, I think is more important. I don't think there are many fake news that we at least learn in Indonesia about climate change. There's simply not much news about it, that they can decipher. What's worrying though is in Indonesia, a spin coming from what we believe extractive industry trying to frame crude palm oil and mining as something Indonesia needs badly and cannot be relegated. So if you are Indonesian, you're probably aware of this Sawit Baik account, and the last edition is Ilmu Tambang account. And they're very, very interesting and they're very well funded. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me also thank the ISEAS for the invitation and also to commend the study that you have released looking at regional attitudes towards climate change. I also want to thank Ibu here for telling me more about Indonesia. Because I think the national perspective, the national context is very important when you try, at least from the regional level or the global level, to assess the success of climate action. So the dynamics, I think, the national dynamics is very important. And I don't know how I lead research projects, and that it will be important to really dig down the granular information, the kind of information that Ibu here has mentioned about, the perceptions among the difference between the rural and the urban, those that are most affected. Because if you go by the survey of educated, people, then their response will be very different from those that are on a daily basis are impacted by climate. I'm talking about those that have been displaced as a result of cyclones, those that have been displaced as a result of droughts. So that will tell you then and help explain when you talk about the narratives, and I really like the narratives that you have mentioned. I mean, that's very important. Why is there so much distrust? And why is it in certain countries, despite very strong civil society advocacy for climate action, there isn't much of action at the national level? I won't really sort of say I'm a Philippine expert, I don't look at Philippine politics. But if you look at 3 countries in the region where there's so much climate action, I think, you're talking about Philippines, Indonesia, to some extent Thailand. And yet these are the 3 countries that have less progress, if you like, when it comes to looking at green transition, right? We're struggling to meet the national determined goals. And why is that so? So I think a very good start in the survey is now looking at, this division, the rural and urban divide. And on that, I would like to, I won't say it is intriguing, but a very important contribution of the study is really looking at the food security issues between the rural and the urban. And it's a paradox, right? Because you always think that because they're rural areas, that's where you get the food, then most people in the rural areas would be actually more secure than those in the urban areas. Because in the urban areas, you do have the poorest of the poor. And food security is not just physical access to food, but economic access to it. Food may be there, you're not able to buy it. But in the rural areas, it's important because in Southeast Asia, most of the population, more than 50% of the population, are actually in the urban areas. So in the rural areas, they don't necessarily produce food, by themselves. There's not enough to feed them. So they rely a lot on also buying food, right? And it is in these rural areas where you actually see, the sharp deterioration of income because, in the context of the region, you just look at the last 5 years. We had COVID, right? And when you talk about access to food, food in the Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, you buy this from outside as well, right? And then you had the wars where in Ukraine and all that. So, this all affected the supply chain. So, and then of course, inflation, which is bugging everyone, not just in Southeast Asia. So paying attention to the food insecurity in the rural areas is, I think, very important. If you were to get the buy-in from a wider set of communities that also have a lot of, that can contribute a lot in looking at, for example, conserving your forest, right? This is one thing that was a disappointment in COP30, right? Okay, there was mention of deforestation, of course, because probably it's in Brazil, and one of that biomes that is under threat is really the Amazon, not to mention the coral reef. But when you tell your people, to conserve the forest and all that, and yet food is an important agenda, then you can see the disconnect between trying to get their buy-in, but not being able to look at the other impact of climate. And I would even add to this the impact on health, right? Because the reason why we have an emergence of diseases is because we have disturbed the environment, right? And once you disturb the environment, you have an increase in zoonotic diseases. Climate change exacerbates that. And who again are the most impacted and the most. So I think the study on food insecurity is very important. And it also then talks about where do we need, and since I look at regional issues, where are the interventions when it comes to looking at what our dialogue partners can help? And we have always talked about investment. And for food security, the biggest investment is not just infrastructure, but many farmers in the region really are hungry for technology, right? Because you want to have climate smart agriculture and all that. So I guess this is something that we can talk about it later. The other thing is, and I'd like to weigh in really on this thing about trust. Thank you, Minister, for raising that, because I think this is a trend it is a sad thing that's happening across the world, right? It's not just for climate action, from many other things that governments or the international community wants to do, because the moment there's mistrust in institutions, and institutions are the one that brings together interests, gets things, action, talks about collective action, then it's very hard to get things done. So at the national level, you can see that, as mentioned by Ibo, in Indonesia, you see that in the Philippines, the country that is most affected in you just see last month, typhoons, yeah? And yet, when you get countries, even your private sector, to work with you when it comes to investment in infrastructure, investments in disaster reduction, etc., but there's no trust in the institutions. And instead of focusing on important things, in Singapore, it's fantastic when you say the government is doing this, the people are actually knowing, they may not really appreciate it, but you can really see climate action. But it's hard for certain governments to move when most of the time, I think, in the current circumstances, the most important agenda of the day is just to get your people to believe that your government is actually doing something for you, right? And this also impacts, therefore, their relationship with other countries, not just at the regional level, but also their relationship with external parties, right? I think there are many more that can be said about that study, but my last observation is really that when we look at just climate action, public perception, it is a good start to look at food security, but I think it is important to widen that because, as we said, climate change is a threat multiplier, right? And there are force multiplier out there that affects our ability to deal with the multiple complex impact of climate change, whether it is in dealing with misinformation, for example, whether it is in getting the buy-in from your communities to protect the forest, or to even change behavior, or putting pressure on local governments to make sure that they retire their coal plants or looking for alternatives, right? This whole thing, I think, should be put into the study, and this is where the collaboration between ISEAS, SUTD, and hopefully next time, NTU, RSIS, because we also look at climate change, although we put a security lens to it. But the more data, the more information we have, and the more conversations like this, I think there has to be more conversations on the multiple impacts of climate change. If we just talk about climate action, just talk about reduction, all that, it doesn't, as you said, it doesn't affect me. But if you talk about the impact, right? Why do I have to do this? Why is it that although solar energy, wind energy may not be so reliable when there's a bad weather, right? Why is it that now, for example, it is important to reduce emission? Countries now have to consider nuclear energy. And this is now what's happening, right? Despite the concerns about nuclear energy, is this actually a viable alternative? There's now some conversations happening in Singapore. It's a big agenda in Indonesia. It is certainly now an agenda in the Philippines. It has been in the agenda in Vietnam, right? But is there public support for that? Right? So I think many things. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Actually, I think what you're talking about, and we've tried to also bring that out in the survey, is that climate change and climate action it's a very humanizing, and on the flip side also can be a dehumanizing experience. So we try to bring that out in the the results and the kind of studies that we've done. And also, I take your point about the sampling. We have started in the first 2 years doing this on ISEAS' own steam, but then in the subsequent years, we managed to get support. And so that went out as we did do a better sampling across the 10 countries. We are trying to also increase the number of rural respondents. But as you say, right, this ignorance factor, it also would mean that they would be reluctant to take a survey like this, because it means that they feel that they would need to understand a little bit more about the issue. So, can't be perfect, cannot be the enemy of the good. We try to do as best as we can, and hopefully in the subsequent years, we can better expand the survey and do better sampling. And also, as you mentioned, it's a very, very complex project, and made worse over the last 5 years of these conflating and urgent global crises that we've experienced, from COVID to the Ukraine crisis to Gaza, Israel, and all of this has impacted us. And not everyone thinks of these issues strictly in the policy sphere or strictly in your day-to-day life. There's always these overlaps that we encounter in our lived experiences. I would like to invite Professor Harvey to maybe make some observations.
Thank you, Sharon. So as a researcher who is interested in the human dimensions of urban environmental change, I have been acclimatized not to be so surprised by human behavior and human decisions. So I'll just highlight 2 findings which I thought were very important and interesting for the general region to think about. One is about how positions can shift in a short matter of time. I think this is both a cause for optimism as well as a reason for caution. Optimism because it shows that even when the public is a bit lukewarm to your policies and ideas, don't be disheartened, because they can be won over and in relatively quick time. Caution because well, the obverse is true as well. If they have been supporting this policy, it doesn't mean that they will continue to do so infinitely. So even where there are strong support for certain policies, there needs to be attention given such that, I mean, for the love of the word, such support can be continuously supported by the relevant agencies. I think that's interesting and important to know. The other interesting finding I thought would be how I think recently Prime Minister Wong mentioned that ASEAN as a region would like to see Japan taking certain leadership roles. And I think it's interesting that our survey here actually show that this seems to be true, you know, at least in the actions relating to climate change action, that we have seen certain and positive leaning towards Japan taking a greater role relative to the traditional leadership roles that we have seen in EU and in China, for instance. So I thought this too would be my interesting findings to flag. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, glad you mentioned that. So in terms of climate leadership and alliances, we do see in the survey you will read later that there are, you know, countries who are more proactive, and there are expectations for certain countries to be more proactive. And I think in the last few years alone, if you've been following the news, and of course not everyone will follow the same news, we do see, for instance, China coming up, emerging as a green leader. And in fact, China has really steamed on ahead as we get embroiled in all the COP arguments. China's just gone ahead and done its own thing by adopting renewable energy. And it is perhaps in next year's survey, as we take this again, you might see China come up, you know, in the kind of perceptions of what China can do for Southeast Asia, for the region, how we can collaborate with countries like China, with Japan, and even with the ROK. I'd like to maybe focus on a couple of findings that's important. And the first one really is about media perceptions, because we have members of the media here as well. And I think the members of the media who are reporting on conventional media has probably done a very good job, which is why it correlates to higher climate consciousness. The issue now is we are living in this state where there's a lot of disinformation, misinformation, the use of AI, for instance, coming in. To Ibu Paramita, do you see this evidence of generative AI being used to spread misinformation, disinformation, and in what way then can we encourage better citizenry checks, and how can we encourage then the public to find out for themselves, you know, accurate information?
Okay, thank you. I would like to, we have been monitoring what's going on in social media, and depending on how you define the use of AI. I mean, if it's only to generate, you know, images in the Instagram, images of someone running, or that's, everybody has done it. It's very cheap nowadays. Why don't you do it, right? But is there a systematic disinformation campaign against climate change? We don't, that's using AI. We don't see that example, at least in the level that we detect in Indonesia. What we see is spin that probably influence how soon should we do energy transition, how soon we should leave out coal, and whether opening up more forest for biofuel is a good idea. And I don't know whether it's coming from the government. I do not think so. I think it's more coming from private sectors related to crude palm oil and coal, because they have direct consequences from that, right? And the government has been talking about pushing biofuel, and that only gets back to when Indonesia was a rampant deforestator for crude palm oil. So we are watching this, but are they using AI to actually create fake a person, fake expert? We don't see that, and it's really about spin rather than anything.
Okay, so working with the spin doctors
Well,
to make sure that
I am a spin doctor, but for progressive issues.
Right, good. Thank you so much. On the issue of transitioning, because we've talked about earlier and also in the presentation about the higher levels of acceptance from the higher socio-economic groups. And by the way, the respondents are asked to identify themselves on the spectrum of whether they view themselves as being in the lower economic groups or the higher SES groups, because there's no common benchmark that we can use across the countries for income levels, and we don't collect information on household income levels. So they self-identify, and in those groups that identify as higher SES, they are more accepting, whereas those who are lower are more ambiguous. So, then this raises a question, right, where governments are trying to push for certain policies like carbon tax and reducing fossil fuel subsidies. How do we then convince these groups that they will not be left behind and they will be inclusive and just? I think we also earlier mentioned that the pains of accepting these policies are felt more acutely by the lower SES groups than with the higher SES groups. So in what way, and I open this question to Prof. Mely and maybe to Professor Neo, in what ways can we give this assurance and remove the ambiguity for these groups?
Maybe I'll start first. I think we are dealing with a very major issue here. And this issue, although major, is not uncommon. I mean, throughout history, we have seen very paradigmatic shifts in how we work, how we, survive from the Industrial Revolution, where technology changes the survivability of rural and urban contexts, to more recent shifts such as the knowledge revolution, digital divide, and so on and so forth. So I think this green transition falls into this kind of juncture in history where it's a major issue, but it's not something that we've not actually encountered before. So I think there are systematic ways we can try to, bridge this transition such that those who are most affected will be better supported. And so the two steps, first is to understand what is this green transition and what are the different kinds of jobs that will be available as a result of this transition. The good news is that this knowledge, right, or this kind of database could probably be shared across the region because the green sector and the jobs, etc., will be fairly similar. So the first thing that we need to do is probably sit down, and this is something that at LQICIC, some of my other colleagues have been doing. They've been trying to understand jobs, not by the nature of jobs per se, but by the tasks involved in the job and what are the skill sets which are involved to complete this task. So they understand jobs by breaking down the different tasks and then further breaking down the tasks, the skill sets involved. So in this way, right, we can slowly build our database of what exactly do we mean by green sector, green jobs. And we have been in a couple of months, in the last 18 months, myself and some other colleagues, with colleagues from SIT, Singapore Institute of Technology, with Skills Future Singapore, we are trying to map out exactly this kind of terrain, thinking about green jobs and what are the skill sets and tasks involved. So that is the first task that we need to do. And like I said, it probably can be shared with some modification to the region. But the next step is slightly more difficult, which is to understand from the other side what are the vulnerable sector people and what are the kinds of jobs they are doing now and what are the tasks and what are the skill sets. So in that way, we can match. Right, but this, as you can imagine, what we do in Singapore is probably not so relevant to other places because they have to do their own mapping of the vulnerable sector. So I think there is a decent plan to minimize this kind of transition. But I have to be very honest to say that in paradigmatic shifts like this, right, there will be people who will suffer and will be kind of phased out in a kind of there's very little options for them. then it remains for the government to see what kind of support that they can do, because they are unable to bridge this transition. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's really great. This idea that you can do a kind of mapping and share it across. I'd like to open the floor now to the audience in the room. Maybe we'll take 2 or 3 questions, and then I'll go to the online. So, gentleman over there. Anyone else?
Very good morning. My name is Martinus. Actually, I'm a research fellow from Cambodia. Research Institute in Cambodia, CDOI. And actually, I'm also a PhD student from Tokyo Metropolitan University. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join this very interesting research finding and also discussion. And I have 2 points. One is the research methodology, because one of our panel discussion also mentioned about the sampling design. Yes, I think as a researcher, I'm very curious about the research methodology because it is a research finding for the regional research, given different localization and also different local setting from one country to country in terms of the education, different level of education, access to information, especially the climate change perception. And so it can be touched about the research methodology. How do you design the research sampling sample size to represent each countries? And the second point is about the I'm touched with the last finding of the who is the lead, who is the lead regional actor in terms of the climate action, and the finding also find the Japan is the one of the leading climate action in the regional level, and come up with other countries like China, EU, USA, so on and so forth. So, but my question is, why not those countries collaborate with each other based on their expertise? For example, maybe Japan is well known by the regional cooperation and support kind of the politics or politics strategy, and China is very expertise in the advance in technology, green energy or something like that. And then EU expertise in based on their experience a long time ago. So why not we try to come up with the kind of joint action?
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. I don't think we'll take the methodology question because you can read it in the report. And if you have further questions, you can approach anyone of the team to seek clarification. So on the question of leadership, I think Dr. Janil has talked about how ASEAN can be this convening platform to bring all of the different partners together and put it to good use, really. Because there are just so many 11 dialogue partners of ASEAN, each of them with their unique strengths and weaknesses. Maybe some views from our panelists, for views on concrete ideas on what we can get each partner to do with ASEAN. Not all of them, I mean the top ones that we mentioned in the survey is Japan, the EU, US, and China.
In response to your question, it would be great if we can bring all of these countries, because we do have a platform, right? We have the ASEAN +3, the 10+3, then you have the East Asia Summit, with the 10+6. So you're right, leadership who takes, but what do you mean by leadership actually? It is leadership in being able to show that they're meeting their emission targets.
Leadership to influence actions.
Yes. So the reason why Japan has been doing well is because unlike the EU, it was a leader before, but they were so preoccupied with the Ukraine war, right? So, and this is probably explains why the dip. So if they're able to demonstrate that they're actually reducing their emissions because of certain policies that they have or because of certain technology, then this is where we as as those that engage with them will then have to see where their best where is the comparative advantage. And for all, whether it's China, it's the US, it's Japan, even Korea, right? I mean, they're very good already in technology. So, and I think at the bilateral level, it would be interesting to find out actually, from the regional studies, to what extent is Japan actually providing the technological expertise to each of these countries. For example, when it comes to, looking at green transition, in what sense is it in what? I'm not an expert in energy, but if you were China, right, you would be worried about some of what is, while it helps in providing, in developing hydropower in the region, there's the maladaptation part of it, right? There's concern that while all of these hydro plants are it's important because Laos, for example, is a battery to the region. It actually impacts the food security of the riparian states, right? So is there something that can be done in other things, for example, investment in solar energy, where it has reached a point where my understanding of solar energy is you need tracts of land to be able to have a sustainable, stable solar supply, right? Because the problem with energy, as many energy experts are saying, when you look at your energy mix, which is the most stable, and that's why it's fossil fuels, etc. So I'm not sure to what extent we are actually, our scientists or our industries are actually engaging with your dialogue partners. And this is where the governments have to work with their own scientific community, right? To see where is the knowledge, where is the expertise? Because if you leave it to the foreign ministers at the ASEAN level, maybe the knowledge is incomplete. Right? Our work in health security, for example, has pushed for the engagement of the scientific community with the government so that the governments can see where the expertise is, right? And this is where then you can identify who are the leaders. And you can then tap on the expertise of your dialogue partners. So that is ASEAN vis-a-vis the dialogue partners. I think in the region, I know the minister was a bit reticent in talking about what Singapore can do, but this year, Malaysia has been talking about ASEAN actually coming up with a common position. I don't know how we're going to do that, right? But in the ASEAN, my understanding of the ASEAN Committee on Climate Change, it comprises of so many other sectoral bodies. They cannot be, and the debate before was you need to have a coordinating. You were talking about this, Sharon. You must have a dedicated climate change body within ASEAN, right? And perhaps when you have that, then you can bring the relevant sectors, right? That can then say, well, for a regional agenda, this is where we should be. This is where we can sort of pull our common ideas together and perhaps have common positions. And that is where leadership, I mean, if the EU is able to have common positions, it is an idea, it would be a wonderful positive development if there could be some shared positions in ASEAN, right? So Malaysia has flagged that idea. I don't know the Philippines will carry it out, but something for Singapore to consider in 2027.
Actually, I think the bureaucrats won't be so happy to hear about setting up another body.
Can I follow up on that suggestion? I think I actually support this idea, and I think maybe when it comes for Singapore to be chair of ASEAN, this is something that we can really think about, because facilitating conversation and further understanding is necessary. I mean, to address the question my Cambodian colleague has mentioned, climate change action and climate change knowledge unfortunately, it's not just pure knowledge. It encompasses politics, economics,
Science.
Political influence, science one-upmanship. So these are all difficult conversations to wrap our heads around. I mean, if everyone is rational and wants the greater good for Earth, maybe it's easier to proceed with the conversation. But bearing that, we need someone to be as objective as possible, to be acting as a role of facilitator and bring the relevant parties together to have some kind of structured conversations around the issue. I think that's the only tedious but possible viable way to results.
Yeah, this seems like a pretty good place to bring this to an end. But I've always said to succeeding chairs of ASEAN that one of the things the lowest hanging fruit you could do is, of course, common position is very difficult, right? Everyone will have their CBDRs, your common but differentiated responsibilities. Then we'll get into a spiral of who does more, how can we not be caught in the prisoner's dilemma. The easiest thing to do is to just have an ASEAN pavilion at COP, bring your food, and then we do the typical ASEAN diplomacy, and then drive those conversations there in a pavilion. I mean, we save time and money, if we are able to bring it all together. Currently, we have Indonesia has a pavilion, Thailand has one, and some other countries have the others. Why not have an ASEAN one? No need to talk about position yet. Let's build trust amongst ourselves, and then we can go into that deeper conversation. So with that, I want to bring this to a close, and please join me in thanking our panelists for their time and their views. Before I end, also, I would like to invite members of the team who did this survey. Please collect a copy of it on your way out. To please stand up so that we can acknowledge them and for their efforts. Please. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you to our distinguished panelists for an informative and engaging session. I would also like to thank all of our attendees for their active participation this morning. So the report is now available for download on the ISEAS website. For our online audience, you may click on the link which we will be posting in the chat box to access the report, or use the QR code which we will be displaying on screen. Please note that this report is accompanied by an appendix which contains more detailed country-level breakdowns of the findings we discussed today. The appendix can also be downloaded at the QR code displayed on screen. For our in-person audience, physical copies are available on this side of the room on your right, which you are welcome to take. And we have now come to the end of the event, and we hope you have enjoyed the discussion. To our in-person audience, please also feel free to enjoy lunch, which has been set up outside in the foyer. Thank you to everyone, and have a nice day.